Today is the 23rd day of October 2014. We are most fortunate to have Dr. Alok Pandey with us, speaking on the evolution of the new consciousness. Welcome.
Namaste.
Mother said it might take 300 years for the new man to appear, but George Van Vrechem in his books emphasizes the Surom, or the Overman consciousness, as an intermediary step.
Yes.
But Mother also talks about the cells that she had transformed going into others who were ready to receive them. So, can we begin with these?
Yes.
Okay.
Just a little background, as to set the right note, because the idea of evolution is not new. There have been two lines of understanding the evolution aspect. One is, of course, the Indian line, where there is both evolution of the soul through different gradations and stages, and form also comes in that process. So the whole idea of 84 lakh births, transmigration, is essentially about the evolution. But evolution of the consciousness, which was the focus, the form was really secondary. Though there is, as Sri Aurobindo speaks of the story of Dashavatara, there is also something about the form, but it's not been brought too much into the forefront. The only significance of form being that the human form, for various reasons, or reasons of course are primarily that the spiritual element, spark, develops to that extent that in the human form it becomes capable of a self-evolution. It becomes possible for the spiritual element to wake up and arrive at its own fullness. But this fullness, in the past spiritual efforts, has been primarily, at least in the last couple of thousand years, has been primarily focused on the individual's inner fullness, perfection, permanence, going into the beyond. Though in the Vedic age there was some kind of a hint and a very early effort, at least at an individual level, to try to embody that consciousness. So this is just a background. And the other side of evolution we know is what Darwin spoke about, is the evolution of the form. He actually saw a process, and to his credit, it must have been a remarkable observation, guided by an inner intuition, because nobody really saw evolution happening. To have traveled and observed, and obviously he was being led by an inner intuition to arrive at this kind of a thing, which the equipments available in that age did not really support. And how much he had to face from his own family, his own community. And it's only in the early, the previous century, that genetics came in, and there was some evidence that there is an evolution of form also going on. Now, that apart, Sri Aurobindo in his early writing speaks about evolution and the emergence of the Superman. And I think what he wrote at that point of time is a very, very relevant and contextual thing even now, because of the past evolutionary efforts, and that's where the past efforts come in. Nature has tried to exceed the human frame. Basically, human set certain limits for a species, and that species moves within a frame. Within that frame there are its ways of looking at the world, ways of looking at self, ways of relating with others of his kind, with those who are not of his kind, with the environment and world in general. So there is an appropriate science, art, technology, thought, philosophy, even a religion appropriate to the limits within which nature has put a species. Now, nature has tried earlier for some human beings at least, to go beyond. And that has manifested, in the phenomena of genius from time to time. And we know what happens. Sri Aurobindo mentions in one of his aphorisms that the body and sometimes even the mind is not able to contain the inrush of that excessive energy, and there are breakdowns. In India, they were called as vibhutis, men who went beyond a certain limit. and they were really out of the box thinkers. They did not follow a particular norm, and they were like regarded very often as crazy human beings, yet nevertheless who did something stupendously for earth and upon earth. Now there were two kinds of this line of growth. One, which Sri Aurobindo points out, has been an Asuric type, where there is an abundant development of the powers and possibilities of the body, of the vital, and of the mind. Brilliant minds, tremendous vital energy which pushes beyond limits, and even powers which begin to emerge. The ability of the body to go without maybe food and sleep for days on, and even some occult powers and technology which expands to any amount of, without limits. And yet, if the inner being doesn't change, if primarily it is governed by the ego self, then it's a disastrous line. So this was one approach, and Sri Aurobindo in Savitri also cautions us, take not that route. The Titans tried, he's like colossal, like Alexander was a genius, but it was a genius which was stamping itself upon the world. It was a magnified image of his own ego. Despite, nobody can deny that he was a genius in many ways. I mean, an extraordinary person. And the other line which he speaks of is the line along the side of the gods. And I think that's where the real challenge lies, because now nature has become restless, as Mother observed in 1912. The time has come. Sri Aurobindo spoke of it in evening talks, that there are various signs, and the Mother added to those 4 signs another sign, the emergence of mad people. That nature is trying to break the mold, basically, and bring out something else. So in that process, obviously, once the boundaries of human species break down, there is a risk that evolution can take A, the Titanic course, or B, the line of the gods. And of course, later on she goes still further, where there is an integration. Sri Aurobindo speaks of that in Durga's throat, that the Titans representing the force and the gods representing the light and the knowledge. Now, basically, if we look at the Mother's statement, or rather her works, after 56, many things happen. And one of the things that happened was in 58, where Mother says that, or rather late 57, that nature has consented to collaborate. And there she says that when the disciple asks, what does it mean? So she says that nature has been preparing forms based on the old mold. So you may grow inwardly, but the form is of the same animal make. So it's very difficult for such a consciousness to adapt. Mother and Sri Aurobindo had to do this, so they took the challenge, embodied the new consciousness, kept putting pressure on the form. But every person cannot do it. So, but from 58 onwards, she said that this new consciousness, the supramental consciousness, nature has accepted that substance. So every child who is going to come will have something of that consciousness embedded in the very material form which is being built. Which means that matter itself, with or without yoga, will begin to change to bring in the new consciousness. Now, matter may change, bodies may be of a different kind, and it will help. And yet, the consciousness also has to change, because it's not that automatically it will change. It will be like a good hardware, which will support a new software. That's how it will be. And that we can see in the children, the kind of energy that they are coming up with, and many other things which have been observed all over the world, even the kind of thoughts that they are able to have at a very young age. Even some of these children, Mother has spoken of child prodigies, and they are increasing all over the world, precisely because the previous mold was not able to hold or express these new things. They were there, but a child had to be trained, grow up, and then some of them would really become capable of, let's say, writing a good poetry or expressing philosophy. But now many children, like even in their casual speech, it's like their brain automatically receives these vibrations and expresses it. So it's like, the difference between a chimp and a man of the old type, where a chimpanzee could not express many things that human beings could naturally express, language, for instance. So, but now because the brain and the body is changing, that means also that new healing methods will come up and these children will respond to it. Precisely because their bodies will become automatically more receptive. So this is a process which started somewhere in 57, 58 and the mother declared it. It's around the same time, why this timeline is important, because around the same time, again maybe 57 or 58, in one of her talks, she mentions that it will take maybe 300 years or maybe even 56. In fact, she gave two timelines. One was that 1,000 years for the supramental being to come, which is a different thing altogether. It's a long way. But just for the change of consciousness, because before the form completely changes, the consciousness has to change. If you imagine there is a form which is capable of expressing tremendous amount of power and energy, and the consciousness doesn't change, it again can be a very dangerous situation. So she spoke about this 300 years and 1,000 years in the early part. It's not later on. It's because it's there during her talks in the playground.
Yes.
And talks in the playground, as far as I remember, 58 probably was the last talk, and then 62 she never came down.
Right.
Whereas after that, many other things began to happen, which started precipitating the yoga. Actually, around that time, 57, 58, the mother also, there is a very interesting prayer of the mother. She says, the work for which I had come is over, essentially, bringing down the light. And now the supermind will take its own time and eventually it's going to be victorious. So she was mulling over it, if you may use a human word, that whether she should continue to stay, or she should withdraw back. And then she asked for a sign. Now, she doesn't mention what sign it is, but obviously some sign came and she stayed on. Now, what happened after that is that she started precipitating this big gap of time, 1,000 or 300 years, compressing it more and more. Now, how she started compressing, like she is capable of compressing 300 years in 30 years. She is the Divine Mother. So first she brought down, or rather manifested, the consciousness of love, which was supermind brought in the aspect of knowledge. But love, because in 1962 she speaks about the yoga of the world, where she experiences the great pulsations of love. And I think it's a very landmark event, which we of course don't celebrate. We celebrate the 29th February because it's a watershed event. It's a critical event. And what happened after that, though they are at least in a certain sense as important, but naturally they are not much talked about. So one of them was in 1962 when the love began to manifest. Now that means that not only truth, but love. Now love is the power of transformation, which hastens very much. The way truth acts is very different. Truth is like something which brings out everything that is impure. It can annihilate it, it can dissolve it. But love doesn't work like that. Love puts a pressure to change. And she describes it in one of her talks that, the power of purity, the power of truth is very different from the power of love. Purity and truth will dissolve a vibration which, it's not in consonance with it. But love will accept it, receive it into itself and start changing it. So to start with, it meant that many more beings will have a chance. And the pressure, the intense pressure of the truth consciousness, which may have disrupted at one level, we spoke about the distractions, may not be necessary because now love is there as a transfiguring force. She herself embodied, she and Sri Aurobindo embodied all this, but obviously they saw that this love will be much misunderstood. We know how much all of us disciples misunderstood their work, and so truth had to be established first. Now after 62, another great event took place, that was in 1967. And even before that, she experiences the impersonalization of the body consciousness. But that's about an individual aspect where, but it had a great impact. it meant that all the physical issues and difficulties she took within her body, and all that was happening within her body automatically spread into everywhere else wherever there was a opening. So this impersonalization of the body was the landmark event which, where she speaks about the contagion.
Yes.
And during that time, she also speaks about a state which is neither of the dead nor of the living. She begins to see that. In fact, she says that what we call as death may be many different things, but that may be going into another domain. Now, after this in 67, she speaks about two things. One is that supermind entering into a realizing power. And that's where she speaks about the children who are coming are very different.
Yes, she says 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yes, 7. That was the time which she said Sri Aurobindo had mentioned. And now the children who are coming are very different, but we have to see it was not in a vacuum. 56, 58, the great event, 62, and then 66, and then the 67 event takes place. And at that point of time, she even brought down the consciousness of Ananda, which is the far off goal. In fact, if we read through Sri Aurobindo's writings, his letters, he says that ultimate goal is divine love and Ananda. But truth must first work. So she was compressing time like this, and she says that to Satprem that, I am moving very fast, and you cannot catch up with me. And when the consciousness of Ananda came, she said, nobody is ready because it needs a super Parsifal. These were the words he used. Somebody who is completely free of all desire for pleasure. He says there is not one person who has that purity to embody it. And yet she waited. So what I mean is that her previous pronouncement of 300 years are beginning to get more and more compressed. And I think in response to this work of the mother, tremendous work, there are no words to describe it. In 1969, she experienced that wonderful, benevolent, luminously peaceful and joyous consciousness, which she called as the Superman consciousness. Of course, the word Overman and Superman is a question of how we translate it. So I'm using the word Superman because it goes with the agenda translation. I'm just following that. But yes, one can call it the Overman, Lesser Home, and Now, what she said is that this is the consciousness which will serve as an intermediary between man as he is now and the supramental being. Because one of the biggest challenge was, what will be the process of the change? Man doesn't know it. The supramental being knows it, but the supramental being is not yet there. So the Superman consciousness is a consciousness which, she has used the word, acts like a guide. Now, this is different from a divine guidance within, which, saints and seers have as to the attitudes, as to, some activity which has to be done or not done. She speaks about the guidance which has to take place in the very material processes. And she says that this consciousness tells me the processes that have to be done because it's a totally new thing. And it's then that she also remembers one of the incidents when a lady had asked her that how many lumps, how do I know how many lumps that the divine wants, lumps of sugar divine wants me to put in my tea? And the mother laughed and said, it doesn't matter. It's the attitude which is important. But after this she says, well, now I would say that the divine knows exactly how much lumps of sugar you need to put into your tea. Now, this is very interesting change because the very material consciousness is being guided so that the right processes. Now, I take it as akin to bring a comparison what change it would bring. Let's say that great yogis have also experienced, spiritual consciousness. And the mother said they were like prototypes. The other day, I was reading about, some sadhu was naked and mother was shown the picture and said he's like the prototype of the future, what man can become. But he doesn't have a creative power. So he is there as just as a possibility. Now, yet, when they came to, many of them, when they came to the body, they had to use the normal means. Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa is a classic example. Swami Vivekananda, they had achieved a very high grade of consciousness. And yet, in fact, Swami Vivekananda pointed out the supermind to Sri Aurobindo. So he was well aware, we know these are his own words. And yet, when it came to the body and the material processes, we know what happened subsequently. And the mother mentions to this incident also throat cancer or diabetes, tuberculosis, whatever. But this consciousness, now in animals, they by instinct know what their body should do within the limits of the species. Man has lost it and he works by reason. If I have diabetes, I shouldn't take sugar, for instance. After some time, the theory changes and we start following another norm. But now with this new consciousness, as I understand, now this part she has not openly declared, but as I understand and based on my own experience with a lot of people, this consciousness will work within the body to awaken an intuition of the body. Because the mother said that the new being will be governed by intuition. Now it will work, awaken an intuition within the body, and the body will know what should be done, what shouldn't be done, and it will navigate through the jungle of forces and hasten the supramental being and its coming. So this is another aspect of this Superman consciousness. Another thing which is said very interesting, that it's a very powerful consciousness, but it's full of compassion. She has in fact used the word mercy and clemency. Clemency. So it will be a consciousness which is full of kindness, mercy, forgiving. Forgiving is a much lesser human substitute.
Compassion.
Yeah, compassion, but compassion which luminously understands all that is. In fact, the word clemency, I was very surprised that she has used a word.
It's a very interesting.
A very interesting word, and this word is a very subtle shade. Compassion is something very powerful which comes from above. Clemency is something which easily pardons. It's something which comes to that. And another thing which this consciousness does, and these are all interconnected: the benevolence, the clemency, the compassion, the mercy, because it will work towards removing the ego-based life. Now, how it will work? The traditional ways, by surrender to the divine and offering it. Of course, that is the path if one wants to hasten. But even otherwise, it will work to demolish the ego-based systems, institutions, modes of living, all these, because the mother makes very interesting statements. One of them, one of the places she reminds us of what Sri Aurobindo has said, that man has to learn to live from within outwards and not base himself on institutions, systems, etc. And the mother says, yes, this is so true. She also says that Supermind has to find the law of his living from within. And then she says he is not going, this Superman consciousness is not going to live by the normal, conventional, moral, social and religious standards of human beings. And she emphasizes on this particularly towards the end. Now, what do we see in today's children? They have their own inner standards, inner values, which are so different. Now, I take this example even otherwise, living in. Many people are shocked that, oh my God, the new world and people are living in. But if we see at another level, it's an expression of truth of the being. People are not living together just because they are married. They're not following a social institution. They are not even following a religious edict.
Moral code.
They are not following a moral code.
Yes.
But they are following a deeper inner truth which goes beyond the frames in which society has so far, accepted and learned to live. And many such things are happening all over the world. Age is now no barrier between two human beings, and coming into the mainstream, human beings are beginning to accept even, the girl may be older, the man may be much less. And also another thing which it is doing is, at some level, we spoke about the physical change, that abolishing the strong man-woman differences. Men are taking up many of the activities which traditionally women take up. Women are taking up many of the activities which men are supposed to take up. And even at the gross physical level, I must say that there is a blurring which is beginning to take place so early. Something which he spoke of as 1,000 years hence. So I feel that, post 1969 and throughout 1969 till almost December and even later on, she speaks about this new consciousness, which is the Superman consciousness. And again she says very benevolent, smiling, luminously peaceful, joyous. And she also says something very interesting. It will have the power to automatically defend human beings, who are changing, against many of the adverse attacks. Now, these adverse attacks may come in the form of ill will. I was reminded of this, I think, what you wrote the other day, that how it will work. Now, there will be a lot of ill will thrown against these human beings, and they'll be prone because their bodies are still made of the same stuff. But how it will tackle it? By an energy of love, by an energy of compassion, and transform it. So it's a very interesting aspect, I just got reminded of, that experience of yours, and how this energy will automatically emerge like an intuition or guidance from inside. Now, traditionally, we were taught to defend ourselves. Now, when we defend, we are separate beings. I defend myself against you. But where I take you, and the pressure and power of this consciousness annuls that vibration. This is going to be the law of the future. There are doctors who speak about it, that healing through love. And it is how it is coming through many doors. When I studied my MD, we were taught that one of the ways that you can destroy cancer cells is by imagining playing a game in which your white blood cells are destroying the cancerous cells. So one of the oncologists, Dr. Bunny Siegel, he has written a wonderful book on Love, Miracle and Medicines.
Yes.
And he says that there can be another way where you, by the energy of love, tell these cells to relax, not to be frightened, not to be violent.
Yes.
And mother speaks of something very similar in in one of her conversations, where she says if a tumor cells begin to, they overreact, and you have to tell them to be quiet, not to be frightened. Many of these cells are simply frightened. Some, of course, are revolting, some are frightened, some are simply reacting to, something else. And they can be asked to be quiet, to be peaceful, to be... So this benevolent consciousness, which is full of love, which understands, is full of compassion, and it will not only have a power, but she also says it will have a practical omnipotence, a knowledge which is not a book knowledge, that, oh, let me see what I have read. Oh, it's not even like, okay, last time I experienced this. No, spontaneously at that point of time, this omnipotence will manifest itself. So basically replacing the animal instinct. Nobody teaches an animal what is to be done as it grows up, but its knowledge is there, given by nature. Now that will be replaced by intuition. Intuition in the body, intuition in the mind, intuition in the heart, intuition in the vital.
Mother speaks of that we must talk to the body.
Yes.
Gently, like a child.
Yes, like a child.
Yeah.
And this consciousness, what she has identified as the Superman consciousness, will also, she says something very interesting, that this consciousness will not only, it's not something personal. So it will automatically spread. She says, in fact, she describes the very first contact, that when a number of Jain sadhus came, and they obviously couldn't understand her. So she says, this consciousness was like a rampart between me and them. And what it was doing, while they were speaking, if I may use the word inanities, mother doesn't use the word. She says, I kept smiling. They obviously were not understanding anything, but they wanted to flatter. They said, oh, we have heard a lot about you. But she says, I just kept quiet, because she could see through, that it's a flattery. And she says, at that point of time, I was actually seeing this consciousness go towards them and put a pressure. Now, as it was putting a pressure, she says, one of them, different people were reacting differently. One of them started speaking and communicating. The other one became very excited, and this one had to tell him to remain quiet. The third one was experiencing a kind of stillness. So this consciousness will radiate from all those who are, I would say, recipients by an act of grace from her, who are open and receptive, if you want to put it at the human end, it will automatically radiate all around into all those who are in contact with them. And that is how this will spread. I have, one of the prayer of the mother, which gives a very early hint of this action, where obviously everything is interconnected. And this is a prayer on the ship where she says, I offer these beings, and then she says, and those who are connected and interconnected, and then she says, and through each other the whole world. So this consciousness is going to make everyone, those who embody it, vast. And it is going to push the earth towards vastness, the earth consciousness, which means children who will come up will have need for more space, psychological space, because inwardly they are vast. Then it also, she also says that it will replace our ego individuality with something else, which is like a principle of that individuality. And in that principle, the individuality remains without the conflicts and quarrels which come from the ego individuality. So this is another thing which I see, that these children are spontaneously, they are not that they are conscious of it. And she says that, we are fortunate to know the process. But maybe after, she doesn't say how many years, decades or 100 years, it will be natural and normal, and they will not know how it happened. But they'll be built along another plan. So these children, their need for psychological space, they want and they give also. It's not that they just are being selfish. That will be not fair to pass a judgment like that. They want a lot of psychological space. Then they live in a wideness where the cultural, religious and social identities, barriers, they have broken down for them.
The great barrier breakers.
Great barrier breakers, yes, exactly.
Yes.
The great barrier breakers. And they don't accept the fixed moral codes which have been established either by society or by religion. It's not that they are immoral, but they follow their own inner code. And they go by it, and they learn by it, and they grow by it. And I think this is something very wonderful, these children.
Yes.
They are far more honest, this experience of the mother where the sadhu is trying to please her and flatter her. They will not do. When they come out, if they have not felt anything, they say, well, I didn't feel anything. Or they will be very honest that I want to make money. That's as simple as that. They will not say something simply because it is going to please. Now, of course, there will be some who will be contaminated because the old consciousness is still active. And as she said, just as animals pick up flattery and such things from human beings, she speaks of dogs.
Yes.
So it's quite likely that because we are going through transition, many such things will happen. But by and large, I'm speaking of by and large, this would be the trend. Another very interesting thing she says about this intermediary consciousness, and that is, she says, speaks about it indirectly, not directly in the context of Superman. And Sri Aurobindo has hinted about it in one of his aphorisms. It's a very beautiful aphorism, bringing out the aspect of compassion and, hits at the Nietzschean idea of Superman. And he says that he becomes like the cow of plenty, becomes a slave of all to love all, and thereby by serving he rules. So he becomes, somebody who is ready to serve and help, and generosity is inbuilt in the nature of the Superman. He is generous by nature because one, he is vast, and second, spontaneously, the barriers that, strong barrier that person is different and I'm different, they just fall away like a worn out scale from the eyes. It's just not there. They don't have to put an effort towards it. And of course, a third thing, and that's where the yoga part comes in, where the mother says all those who are trying to master their physical, vital and mental nature are apprentice Superman. So this is a very important thing, and I think that's where the specialized effort comes in. All effort at self-mastery, whether it be the Russian gymnasts, and she spoke about that,
Yes.
or whether it be at a mental level, At different levels, human beings are trying, even at the level of the emotions. Human beings are now far more at one level resilient, at another level wider, and at a third level a lot more in control of their emotions. Let me give this example. Uh, a generation back, not even a couple of generation back, a thing like divorce was unthinkable. People would break down. Even if they lost their love, they would break down because sentiments had such a strong hold upon human beings. But now, what I see in these children, especially, when they part away, they are not bitter. In fact, they are friends. It is amazing. It's just unthinkable. And when we look at mother's play of, towards the future, this is what she speaks about, that it's okay to part. It's not a sin. But when you part, let there be no bitterness, because eventually we must remember that the source of love is that. And it enters into the human play, gets mixed up. Now, even when these children are not conscious of it outwardly, they can't, speak about it. But they behave like that. I know of number of children, especially in the students' context, where I have seen them, and of course grown-ups in that age group, where they have parted from each other and they have remained best of friends. They are not bitter about it. And it's something amazing. Now when I look back to my parent generation, it was an impossibility.
Yeah.
Either the husband wife stuck together despite the quarrels and the bitterness, and at one level of course there was love always deep behind, and social niceties and all those things were there. Or else if they broke up, it was very, very traumatic. Acrimonious. And it's amazing that how they're able to move on. I would say that they are much more in control of their feelings than what one generation was. So, lot of changes. These are just some of them. Also about the intuition of life. See, how much, at least in even my generation, though I am 60 born, but at least parents used to worry about what will he do when he grows up, some kind of a job. In India, it used to be very common. It means you have to plan it with reason. Now, these children are so beautifully attuned through an inner intuition that they spontaneously have a natural trust in life. They're not planning the future. They live the future. They move through it. They navigate through it. Guided, just as an animal goes through life by instinct, they go through by intuition. So the age of reason is beginning to go away. They don't like to plan actually. And more they live by an inner feel, and I think these are very good signs. So my own feeling is that this 300 years phenomena, which she spoke of, she has compressed it to, who knows, 30 years, 50 years, maybe at most 100 years. That's what my
So when Nalini says the Superman is already amongst you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one can see it in these children.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to ask your insights on is when Mother speaks about this new consciousness being right on the edge, that it's not far from us. We have the issue of Upanishad.
Yes.
It's far from us and it's very near. But
Tade jati tanne jati
yes.
tad dure tadvantike
So
tadantarasya sarvasya vah. Beautiful, yes.
Yeah. And Mother tells Satprem that it's just like that. Just a little movement and it's there.
Yes. She speaks of just shifting the needle.
Yeah.
And in fact, she says, that's what I do now. So, look at the barrier. What is the real barrier? It is the ego, which is just a formation of nature, a mold, which, is a whole lot of things. The word ego conjures a number of things, not just pride and vanity, that's the gross form, but this sense of acute separateness, a disconnectedness with everything that is around us, everybody around us, the whole cosmos around us. But, now this idea that we are one with the cosmos And the cosmos is a conscious power that is going to help us. This book, the famous book, The Secret. It's one of the books which propound this idea that, the cosmic forces are there to help us. Then Einstein made such a remark that, the whole, every event is the creation of the entire cosmos. Now, this sense of interconnectedness with the world has come up. Even in ecology, the concept of Gaia, the mother as a living entity, the earth as a living mother.
And Sri Aurobindo wrote this to Dilip Kumar Roy years before the Gaia theory.
Oh, yes.
And he said, the earth is a conscious being, and the world is only the form it takes to manifest.
Mother's famous experience in 1915, which she had in Japan, where she experiences the physical being being lifted up, and the whole earth uniting with the Supreme. And Sri Aurobindo says, yes, there is a luminous earth, and this earth that we experience here is a shadow. It's just a mold. The real luminous earth is pressing to precipitate itself. So it's these children are going to breathe that atmosphere. That's the most. In fact, she says that whether you are conscious of it or not, whether you know it or not, by the very fact that you are born at this moment upon earth, you cannot but breathe this atmosphere. So children feel so free, so naturally vast. They are, even world has become compressed in such a way that, because technology also then begins to support that today for them, one foot in New York and another in Pondicherry is quite okay, which just about maybe 30, 40 years, I think you would know better, was so difficult. It was so difficult. And now it's like so common.
And now I watch a 2-year-old on a cell phone.
Yes. So I think everything is pushing towards that.
Yes. The sun-eyed children
Yes.
of a marvelous dawn.
Yes. And they are full of a carefree laughter. They have an X-ray vision. They are able to see the hypocrisies of the old and point out. Just as the sun, when it rises, it shows everything. They are able to look inside themselves, and they are able to see in others. I remember one incident about a 5-year-old, and when one of the parent, told this child that, look, just say that, I'm busy. He says, but you're not busy.
Yes.
You're not busy. So these children, see the truth, they know the truth.
Yes.
And as I said, barring the fact that the old is still trying to contaminate many of them. And of course, the old and, if I may use a strong word, rotten education system, which stifles this growth. Perhaps that's why the mother, she had called Auroville as the cradle of the Superman. And she had given the name to one of the schools as the last school.
Yeah.
And she had to make so many concessions. It's amazing when we look at our own school. So here in the ashram. So she wanted a free progress system, which was a progress guided by the soul. Now, obviously, nobody could get it. Even conceptually, it was not clear. People still felt a distinction between spiritual, material, and all that is there in her conversations. So step by step, they would, when some people say no, some are not ready to go through the new free progress system. Initially, she would tell the teachers to look inside themselves, but then later on, she said, okay, keep the free progress only for those who are ready.
Yeah.
Because it was like a concession. But she didn't want.
Yeah.
She didn't want she wanted free progress to be the main stream, and all other forms to be just as a kind of subordinate thing.
And the few who felt it and understood it suffered for it.
Suffered for it, absolutely. Suffered for it. So I think still, unfortunately, because of the old world and its pressure, one of the, I think it is 70 or 71, she says, when Auroville, she declared that Auroville is the cradle of the Superman, she says, I don't want to declare this message. And then she explains to the disciple, you know why? Because the governments will immediately begin to resist, because they will understand, oh, Superman, who do you think we are? We are the Superman. And they will resist. Whereas human beings will get bloated up in their ego. Oh, by the very fact that I have come to Orwell, I am a Superman. So she says, I don't want to give this message. Later on, she modified the message and said that we want Orwell to be the cradle of the soul. She modified it. So that's because this will be so much misunderstood, and the old consciousness is really not going to, it's not an elitist club. Superman is a being of compassion. He's a being of gratitude, if I may use the word. He's a being of love. He's a being of mercy. And that, of course, Sri Aurobindo spoke about it. Even the mother spoke about it long back. He is guided by intuition. He carries within himself the possibility, if he awakens them, of relating with the cosmos in a very different way, not in the way of egocentric, I have to survive against you, but in the way that, well, both of us work together towards something beautiful and harmonious. So these are the real aspects of a Superman, and he will eventually find the way for the transmutation of the body.
I had read, and I don't recall where, that the Vedic rishis had encapsulated the supermind but were unable to spread it.
Both aspects were there, not really transformed by it, because they entered the supermind through a different door. Like with Mother and Sri Aurobindo, the whole yoga was to transform the earth consciousness. So there is no other way except the supramental. But the Vedic rishis were in quest of immortality. Now, immortality comes only the limitless can be immortal, because what we understand by death is simply a passing away of the being from one state to another. There is no death. Actually, in reality, there is no death. It's like if I walk out of this room, I might as well say that this room no more exists for me and therefore is dead for me. So in that sense, death, what we call as death, and it strikes us, is simply a shift of consciousness from one mode of being, material, to another mode of being, which is subtler. And of course, a snapping of the connection with earth matter. But essentially, it's a shift. So Vedic rishis wanted to find the secret of immortality, and they found that if we live in the consciousness of infinity, then automatically, simultaneously, you are aware of this and that. They in fact use the word, Mundaka Upanishad used the word, this is that. Mm-hmm. And that's how they made the discoveries that has become this. And they made this, even in Ish Upanishad, Atme Vabhut Vijanata. And they spoke about this truth consciousness as Satyam, Ritam, Brahatam, the vast, the limitless. And so many hymns are, attributed to that. So they glimpsed the supermind, and they knew that that's where immortality is possible. Now, some rishis who climbed this high stair, one example that comes to my mind is Eggenberger. He knew that if I enter into that state, it is immortal. But he wanted to bring that consciousness upon earth to know the right law of everything. In fact, there is a very interesting thing that in the Vedas, it is the Surya who becomes Yama here. In fact, Yama and Yami, Yami is Yamuna river, they are born of Surya. So, Yama is the guardian of the mortal sphere, and Surya is the guardian of the celestial sphere. So, it's like a shadow world in which Yama becomes the truth, the so-called harsh truth of life. And he guards everything with an impartial gaze, where the saint and the sinner, the hero and the weakling, all. But his jurisdiction is on the mortal sphere. So he can work upon mind, life and body, but not upon the soul, which is the immortal element. Now, this sphere which they saw, and they saw that. So, he wants, Eggenberger in a very famous prayer in the Ish Upanishad, he wants the law of truth and sun to manifest here, not the law of death. So there is a beautiful sloka, which is a prayer, invocation. Hiranmayena patrena satyasyapi hitam mukham Satyene Pushanna Pavranu Satya Tattvam Pushanna Pavranu Satya Dharmaye Drishtaye. So it runs like this. Hiranmayena Patrena Satya Sapi Hitam Mukham. The face of truth is covered by a golden lid. That remove, O fosterer, Tattvam Pushanna Pavranu Satya Dharmaye Drishtaye, so that I may see the law of truth. The mother speaks about in the agenda that all our laws are simply habits and they are falsehood, including the laws of the body. She says one of the things, it's good that we are reminded of that. One of the things that the Superman consciousness has been doing is to show that all these so-called, we call as infallible medical dictums are falsehood. They are not true. They are simply habitual ways of responding of the body. Many of these so-called laws are simply artificial modes of living and being, including social laws. They are not true. So the Rishi invokes the law of truth. Obviously, the collectivity was not ready. Some of them tried to embody it within the mind, but the majority of them used it as an escape door into the state of immortality in the beyond. So they entered into that. Obviously, they didn't return to tell us, because entering the mortal sphere means again. Some lingered in that state, like Narada. Sri Aurobindo saw him at the plains of the Overman. He refuses to go and is a catalyst between the mortal and the immortal spheres. Or Buddha, whose permanence is basically that, but he refused the nirvana. So some of these rishis, but majority of them used it as a doorway to escape. So not only the collectivity was not ready, which of course is true, but also individual consciousness was not ready, in the sense that as long as you were in a body, you could not receive it. And the third thing is, though they saw it, they glimpsed it, and yet they knew that a long labor humanity has to go through.
Yes.
But the good thing they did it, they implanted the seed of the supermind. Actually, they were looking for immortality and not for transformation. But they implanted the seed of the supermind in the mind of the race. And I think that was a wonderful thing, that gift of the forefathers. And I'm sure they must have done it in every area, geographical area of mankind. But perhaps within India, because India has been like a custodian of these things. So in India, these things have been kept and preserved down by the tradition. Whereas maybe in Chaldea and other places, they were just lost.
Yeah.
But they must have also glimpsed the same thing. And there are indications that they have glimpsed it. So it was like a promise shown to humanity, like the mother's famous sun temple as Hatshepsut in Egypt, which is a forerunner of Auroville. And she said, we had to preserve the idea in the mental world.
Yes.
So the Vedic effort was, they did not envisage transformation for sure. Their quest was immortality. But through that they found supermind. They were not seeking a change, except barring one or two. For the rest, it was arriving at that boundless, infinite consciousness. I think, yes.